The red lines were moving. 3 of them, tracking up Rosalina Costa's forearm like rivers on a map, following the lymphatic channels beneath the skin with the particular precision of an infection that knew exactly where it was going. The lines had started at the scratch, 4 parallel marks across the outer forearm, where a jaguar's rear claws had caught her during a panicked swipe, and in 36 hours had extended past the elbow toward the shoulder. In 12 hours, they would reach the axillary lymph nodes. In 24, the bloodstream, and the nearest clinic, in Karawadi, 12 hours downstream by motorized canoe, might as well have been on another continent. Dona Marcelina Azevedo stood over her apprentice in the Stilt House's treatment room, the space she'd built specifically for this purpose. The walls hung with dried preparations, the shelves lined with tinctures and poultices, and the particular inventory of a forest pharmacy that had served this tributary for 40 years, and watched her standard antiseptic preparation fail. The preparation was andiroba oil mixed with crushed jambu and paudarco bark. She'd used it on infected wounds for decades. It worked. It had always worked. The andiroba's anti-inflammatory properties reducing swelling, the jambu's analgesic numbing pain, the paudarco's antimicrobial compounds attacking bacterial populations, the trifecta, the reliable standard. But the red lines continued to extend. The infection, whatever river pathogen had hitched a ride on the jaguar's claw, was resistant. Not immune, resistant. The preparation was slowing the spread, not stopping it. The standard was insufficient. Two days earlier, the forest had been routine. Rosalina had gone to collect copaíba bark, the resinous inner bark that Marcelina used for wound care and inflammation. The copaíba trees grew 40 minutes walk from the homestead, at the edge of the primary forest where the managed garden transitioned into the uncontrolled green. 6 years of apprenticeship had made Rosalina competent in the forest. She knew the trails, the tree locations, the harvest technique, the particular angle of cut that removed the bark without killing the tree, the sustainable yield that Marcelina insisted on. Take what the tree offers, leave what it needs. The jaguar was at the tree. A young male, maybe 2 years old, not fully territorial. The body language of an adolescent cat exploring range rather than defending it. He was scraping his cheek against the copaíba's trunk, the scent-marking behavior of a cat establishing presence. The resinous bark carried scent well. Rosalina saw him too late, 5 meters. The young jaguar saw her at the same moment. Neither had heard the other. The forest floor after flood season was spongy and silent, absorbing footsteps and paw falls equally. The jaguar bolted, but jaguars bolt through obstacles, not around them. The panicked reverse carrying the animal past Rosalina at speed, and the rear claws, extended for traction on the wet ground, caught her forearm as the animal shoved past. 4 parallel lines. Not deep, not a deliberate strike. The accidental damage of 200 pounds of frightened cat passing at combat speed.
He wasn't attacking. He was running. I was in the way.
Marcelina treated the scratch that evening. Standard protocol. Clean with boiled water, apply andiroba directly, wrap with clean cotton. The scratches were superficial, the skin broken but the muscle intact. In normal circumstances, healing would take a week. But the jaguar's claws had carried something. The particular bacterial load of an animal that walks on forest floors, digs in river mud, and handles prey with the same apparatus that was now sharing its microbial inhabitants with Rosalina's forearm. The infection announced itself at 24 hours. Swelling first, the forearm puffing around the scratches, the skin hot to the touch. Then the redness, spreading outward from the wounds in a pattern that Marcelina recognized but hadn't seen at this speed.
This is moving too fast. Apply the paudarco compound. Full strength.
Rosalina applied it herself, the apprentice treating the apprentice's wound. The particular irony of a healer unable to heal herself using the exact preparations she'd spent 6 years learning to make. 36 hours after the scratch, the red lines past the elbow, the paudarco failing, the 12-hour canoe trip to Karawadi not feasible. Moving Rosalina 12 hours in a canoe with a spreading infection risked the bouncing and exposure accelerating the spread into sepsis. Marcelina worked through her inventory. Every antimicrobial compound in her pharmacy applied sequentially, each one producing a temporary slowdown and then becoming insufficient as the bacteria adapted. To discover whether a forest pharmacy can outperform a bacterial infection that modern medicine would treat with IV antibiotics, and whether a student's radical idea saves the day, subscribe to Amazon Swamp Survival. Some lessons teach the teacher.
Combine what?
Marcelina's response was immediate. No, the two compounds were never combined. Her grandmother hadn't combined them. The tradition was explicit. Andiroba for inflammation, copaíba for wound care. Sequential application, different purposes. Mixing them risked chemical interaction that the tradition hadn't tested. No one had. The tradition separated the compounds because the tradition had always separated the compounds. The reason was precedent, not evidence. And Rosalina, the apprentice with the satellite link, the medical journals, the particular combination of traditional training and modern research methodology, had been reading about synergistic antimicrobial effects.
The copaíba oleo resin contains beta-caryophyllene. The Andiroba contains tetranortriterpenoids. In the journals, beta-caryophyllene has been shown to potentiate the antimicrobial effects of other compounds. It makes the cell walls of bacteria more permeable. If we combine them, the Andiroba's antimicrobials could get inside the bacteria that the pau d'arco can't kill.
Marcelina looked at her apprentice. 23, arm swelling, fever beginning, the red lines tracking toward her shoulder. And speaking with the particular clarity of someone who has been thinking about this longer than the emergency has existed, Rosalina hadn't come up with this idea in the crisis. She'd been considering compound combinations for months, testing them mentally, reading the research. The crisis was just the trigger. The mentor-student relationship strained on its axis. Marcelina's knowledge was deep, experiential, earned through 40 years of practice. Rosalina's knowledge was different, broader, research-informed, operating on biochemical principles that the tradition hadn't accessed because the tradition didn't have access to the framework. Both were right. Marcelina's caution was legitimate. Untested combinations genuinely risked adverse reactions, chemical interactions that could worsen the infection or damage tissue. Rosalina's insight was also legitimate. The scientific literature showed clear evidence that the synergy she described was real. Both forms of knowledge, experiential and analytical, pointed in different directions. The red lines reached the upper arm. The window was closing. Marcelina brewed the combination. Her hands, 67 years of herb preparation encoded in the particular dexterity of fingers that had crushed, strained, boiled, mixed, and applied more compounds than she could count, worked the unfamiliar combination with the precision of expertise applied to novel material. Andiroba oil, heated. Copaíba oleo resin, expressed from the bark that Rosalina had been collecting when the Jaguar scratched her. Combined in a stone mortar, the oil and resin blending into a compound that was darker, thicker, and more pungent than either component alone.
I trust you, Marcelina.
The application was direct, onto the wound, under a poultice of clean cotton, secured with bark cloth wrapping. Marcelina's traditional method applied to Rosalina's innovative compound, the two forms of knowledge meeting at the junction point of an infected forearm. The first hour produced nothing visible. The red lines held their position, not advancing, not retreating. Marcelina checked every 15 minutes, pressing the skin above the infection margin, reading the warmth and tension the way a builder reads a joint. The second hour, the red lines faded. Not disappeared, faded. The particular shift from angry red to dusty pink that indicates vascular inflammation decreasing. The swelling in the upper arm began to soften. The heat, the radiating warmth that an active infection produces, dialed down a degree.
It's working.
Down, you're doing well.
By morning, the red lines had retreated to the elbow. By evening, to the wrist. The combination compound, the Antidote copaíba synergy that Rosalina had hypothesized and Marcelina had formulated, was killing the infection that neither component could address alone.
I've not seen this.
The biochemistry, as Rosalina explained it through diminishing fever, was elegant. The copaíba's beta-caryophyllene compromised the bacterial cell walls. The Antidote's tetranortriterpenoids, once inside the compromised cells, destroyed the bacteria's reproductive machinery. Together, penetration and destruction. Apart, each insufficient. The particular arithmetic of synergy, where 1 + 1 equals more than 2. Adaleton arrived on the third day. Rosalina's father, paddling 12 hours from the downstream community where he'd heard by radio that his daughter was injured, found Rosalina sitting up, arm wrapped, fever broken, and Marcelina sitting beside her with a notebook filled with compound ratios and dosage observations.
Cell wall permeability. The evidence is clear.
The transformation. Marcelina had entered this emergency as a mentor, the authority, the tradition holder, the woman whose 40 years of practice qualified her to make every treatment decision. She exited it as something different, a collaborator. The tradition was intact, her formulation skills, her botanical knowledge, her clinical observation, but the tradition had been expanded by the students' contribution. The compound joined Marcelina's pharmacy, labeled in Rosalina's handwriting, the precise notation of a woman who kept records in both Portuguese and Latin binomial. The jar sat on the treatment shelf alongside 40 years of traditional preparations. Not a replacement, an addition, the tradition continuing through growth rather than repetition. Rosalina's apprenticeship changed after the Jaguar scratch. Not in duration, she still had years of learning ahead. In dynamic, the teaching now flowed both ways. Marcelina teaching Rosalina the experiential knowledge, the feel of bark, the smell of correct preparation, the clinical intuition that no journal provides, and Rosalina teaching Marcelina the analytical framework that made sense of why the traditional preparations worked.
Doesn't stand still. Pharmacy should be here.
The Jaguar scratch healed in 3 weeks. 4 white lines across Rosalina's forearm, the permanent markers of a panicked cat and an accidental collision that triggered a pharmacological discovery 40 years in the making. Rosalina traced the scars sometimes. The lines ran parallel, evenly spaced. The geometry of a jaguar's claws laid out on human skin like notation on manuscript paper. The lines said, "You were in the wrong place." The compound that resulted said, "The wrong place produced the right discovery." Mentor and student. The relationship continued, its polarity reorganized. What Marcelina had always given, tradition, technique, 40 years of embodied knowledge, she continued to give. What Rosalina now gave back, analysis, synthesis, the particular intelligence that combines old knowledge with new frameworks, completed a circuit that neither woman could have completed alone. The pharmacy grew, 1 jar at a time.